My name's Rob Sullivan, and my guests today are Richard and Megan Brasser. Richard, I have known since we were 7 years old. We grew up in downtown Chicago together, and I could not be more excited. These are two of the kindest, most fun, most spiritual people I know. So, welcome.
Great to be here. Good to see you, Rob.
Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
All right. Well, Richard, what I want everybody to know about Richard is somebody who is great at everything he's ever tried. Uh, and so I'll give you an example. When we were little kids, we used to go down to Woolworths on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and we would buy model airplanes and different things like that. And sometimes we would build them together, but a lot of times I would just see him working on his because he lived in the apartment building next door up on the 45th floor. And I remember watching him do it. And like my idea of like I'd get the tester's glue, I'd start putting the plane together. I'd have glue all over the plane, I'd have glue all over my fingers. The thing would look like a basic disaster when I finished. Richard, on the other hand, had like 20 paintbrushes, all of different sizes, like, and would meticulously do these F-106 designs to make it look like an actual Air Force plane, which it did. So, I mean, like, even from when we were little kids, I remember looking, going, how does he do that? Yeah, it's like he was always just really good at it. And then later on, became a drummer in a band. He was really good at that. He became a professional golfer. He was really good at that. He started a number of different companies that were, with just fantastic ideas and really, successful, just great creative endeavors. And, there's, race car driver, pilot. There's nothing Richard hasn't tried and succeeded in, which is really cool. And I have to say, there was probably a time in my life that I was like, ugh, jackass, but because there's always a little bit of jealousy when you see people do things better than you. But like after a while, I'm like, you know what? It's just who he is. He's awesome, and so I'm very grateful to be able to call him a friend. So that's a little introduction there of
Well, that's the nicest introduction I think I've ever had. So you're making me blush.
yeah. So well, it's well deserved. So talk to me though. I'm curious. With all that you had that great spiritual component too. Where did that come from?
I think it's pretty directly attributable to my mother and father. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I feel very very fortunate to have had the parents that I did, not only as role models, but as watching them interact with the world and other people and how they were. I mean, you knew my mother and my
Yeah.
father, and just incredible at people building, at being positive, about being creative. My mother, was always trying to get better. Every day of her life. And in fact, one of her famous sayings was, every single day you're either ripening or you're rotting. And if
Oh
you if
wow.
you think that you're staying the same, it's an illusion. You have to be improving every single moment. And I think that's fed into. It's like the goal was never to be really good at anything. The goal was to be better than I was yesterday. And so when you do that for, as the book says, 10,000 hours, you get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people kind of, have a lot of enthusiasm in the beginning, and then they kind of, level off, and that's, like that. Then you get to be mediocre, right? And it's not
Yeah.
intentional, but if you always have that spirit of improvement, you're always getting better, and to approach it with, I mean, my father, he can and he's now 91. He can have the roughest situation ever, and I'll say, "How you doing?" He's like, "I'm great." You know, he just has the most optimistic, positive approach to life. And so, if you're approaching those things, even when you hit roadblocks or you hit things that are tough, that resiliency that my parents modeled and the determination, perseverance. I mean, it has been something that is bred inside of me, and it's not something I'm even that conscious of. So, I was very lucky, very fortunate to have the parents that I did.
Interesting. Well, for the record, it doesn't take Richard 10,000 hours to do anything. I remember distinctly when we were about, well, it was 1976 because I remember the song, the Starland Vocal Man song was popular, and your mom and my mom went and picked us up at camp. But while we were at camp, there was somebody in our group, and I have no idea. I don't remember any of the kids that we went to camp with, but I do remember one of them, not by name, whose family was really into yodeling. And somehow or another, Richard convinced him, even though he said it was a family secret, that he should teach Richard how to yodel, which actually Richard, I recall doing pretty well with. And I remember thinking, first of all, how did he get this kid to share a family secret? And how come I can't do that too? You know, so there was no 10,000 hours that week at camp. I promise you all that. Uh,
Oh
all
my
right.
God, that's funny.
So, yeah, yeah, no, probably not at
Maybe
this
another
point.
time.
So, the one thing, okay, first of all, I love that expression of your mom's, that if you're not ripening, you're rotting. That's beautiful. There's a guy that I used to know when I worked at Leo Burnett who he was kind of the same jolly sort of soul. And I'd ask him, hey, how you doing? And he'd be like, every day is a holiday and every meal's a banquet. And I like that too, because it was just such a nice, it was just who he was. Uh, anyway, so the spiritual side of things is interesting to me because it's something that like I didn't really know about you until years later. And obviously, and the thing that really struck me when I first realized it or heard about it was your support of Megan and the fact that like Megan's always been really intuitive and she'll hear things or get messages in dreams or whatever or just have a psychic impression of something, and you were super supportive of that, where a lot of people would probably have been like, oh, my wacky girlfriend or whatever. But you didn't do that. So talk to me about that and like what that was like for you, both of you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, once again, it's kind of my background. My mother was very spiritual. Came from a background that very much supported, working on things like it being intuitive or, working on psychic abilities. It sounds kind of silly, but it's, she'd play games on flights and she'd hold, have a card and she'd want me to guess what it was. And one particularly funny time, I could see the card in her sunglasses. And so I was like, King, I think it's black, maybe spades. She's like, oh my gosh, that's right. Well, I rattled off like 20 in a row, and she almost made the plane land. Like she was so excited that I finally embraced my talent. So now my father, he grew up, a farm boy with a Dutch, Dutch Reformed church parents. So he's less about the psychic stuff. So that was mainly my mother. But when I met Megan, and I'll let her tell her story in a second, she had some pretty astounding capabilities. And there are things that you couldn't, shirk off to luck or a guess or things like that. They're very dramatic, very accurate, very specific things that she seemed to know, and that happened, and they couldn't happen any other way. So it was just another example of what I had kind of grown up around my entire life.
Dang.
Yeah.
You want to tell your story?
Well, I
Yeah.
think by the time I met Richard, I was definitely, a little bit shut down about it. Nobody really seemed to care or be curious. And besides my mom or maybe like my best friend in college, but other than that, it just wasn't like something you talk about at University of Iowa a
Yeah,
lot
she was in rural Iowa where she grew up.
in the 90s. Yeah. And so Richard just had so many questions, which was brand new to me. And so I think that's what helped me to take it more seriously. In fact, he probably took it seriously for 15 years before I did. He had more questions about it than I did. Like, how did you know that? Tell me more. And so once you start using it, you pay attention to it, and then after 15 years, I finally started trusting it. But
Yeah.
he trusted it.
She still argues with the voice, but besides that, she's trusting it more.
Well, yeah, the messages have saved my life and my children's lives on multiple occasions. So now I just, I definitely have respect for something bigger than me communicating with me, and I should listen.
Yeah. Well, Richard, she and I argue with Grok AI too, but that's probably more warranted.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, all right. So
Me and
we
you
are usually right. Yeah. Yeah. And then Grok apologizes after I get upset
Well,
with
AI can only get so good.
it. Exactly. So I want to pursue this a bit because what strikes me is okay. So you guys have had, and anybody watching this can see just the glow and the positive energy. But over the last few years, you guys have been through a lot. And so one of my questions is, how do you keep the positive energy in those moments, when it would be really easy for the average person to throw up their hands and be like, what the hell?
You want to start?
Definitely those moments. But fortunately for us, it's usually not in the same moment. Like when I'm having a really positive day, I lift Richard, and Richard's one of the kindest men I know. He has proven he's not a vindictive person whatsoever. So he doesn't let me live in the negative, toxic stuff very much at all. And we're very into the power of positivity and energy, and what you think about you create. And we have 4 children watching us, and so we really I'm very grateful to say we usually don't get down at the same time, and in the last 10 years that's been what um has saved us.
Wow, that's
Yeah, I
amazing.
mean, it's funny. I remember, my dad's pretty practical, and I think at an early age, I had an appreciation for being very grateful for the great things that you have in your life, and not expecting that you deserve them. He used to say, "Hey, you're gonna have to work your butt off because you're not nobody's standing on the corner handing out $1 million bills. It's like
Yeah.
you're not, you don't deserve anything more than anybody else." And so, the first, I don't know, 45 years of my life were pretty unbelievably amazing. Things seemed to come easy. Had a very, very fortunate life, had great people around me. And so, when we ran into some really big life challenges, it wasn't a woe is me, this is terrible, look what I've lost, or look what situation I don't deserve. It was more, wow, I had an incredible run, and I'll be back up the mountain soon. But the old expression of, when you're going through hell, keep on going, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to stop. You don't want to, let negative energy kind of surround you. And so, like, the rough times, the times to make sure that you're vibrating at a high energy, you are being grateful, you are looking to the future, you're persevering, you're working hard, you're not letting the all the negative feelings slow you down, because, like I said, going through hell, like, you want to go through it as fast as you can. So I think that's really important, and it's not always easy. None of us are great every day. So
Well, and I
Yeah.
think there's a big difference between me and Richard on that. I think he's referencing the country song. I can't think of who sings it, but if you're going through hell, keep on going. Da, da. But I am different than Richard in that regard. I sit down, have a seat, and I look the devil in the eyes, and I have a lot of questions. And where Richard's like rebuilding the future and always future oriented, I've been the one that studies it and wants to know everything about it and the motives. And so, I mean, what you say?
sure.
Yeah.
But I found when you're in hell, there's always like a skylight and to God, and to stay
Well,
totally connected to God. And that's where I feel fully protected. I don't recommend many people sit down and study hell. Um,
yeah.
but
And
and
if you have a choice to not go through it, don't go through
yeah,
it.
I have always felt fully protected doing it. And I just feel like if I'm in that space, I want to know why. And I want to know everything about it. And I don't think it's an accident. I don't think anything in life is accidental. So I'm like, well, if this happened to me, I'm supposed to be able to figure this out. So I want to learn everything I can about it. And I ask a lot of questions. And
But I also think, having a perspective. I went to a business mastery program with Tony Robbins, and I know some people think he can be cheesy or whatever, but it was transformative. It was amazing. But one of the stories he told, and always has always resonated with me, which was, he talked about his business life, and he had an absolute, the worst situation he could ever possibly imagine early on in business, and he got through it. He overcame some things that he didn't think he could, And then later on, middle of his business, he got one that was twice as big, and he overcame it. Then he had one that was 10 times as big, and he overcame it. And he said, I guess that overcoming a really tough situation qualifies you for a much bigger, harder one. And it reminded me of, when you're working out and you're lifting weights, you finally do that, that 1 rep max. You don't then only lift lighter weights, right? You put another plate on. And so, when I've seen our kids, Megan, even some of the people around us, the challenging times have built incredible amount of character, strength, wisdom, things that you don't get by not going through something hard. And so if I was reminding myself, man, this might be hard, but like just imagine how strong I'm going to be when I get through this, right? And I've seen, Megan absolutely transform as a human being, not because a lot of the stuff was fun, but because a lot of the stuff was so challenging, and it tested, even her own belief of what she could deal with and how to deal with it. And now seeing her at this age, or this stage, as opposed to age, it's incredible. It's incredible to see the person that she's become, and she says she can face the devil. She can face a whole room full of devils and stare them down. So
Yeah.
it's pretty incredible.
Well, one thing I want to point out that as an observer, and I've been very familiar with some of the things that you've gone through, which has just been mind-boggling and mind-numbing, is the fact that, like, okay, if I were just listening to you now and I didn't know anything about you, I'd be like, oh, okay, Richard's,
Lost a job.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, yeah, no, but just like a high-powered, like fast-moving guy who's thinking about how does he get better every day. But what I want to point out, the thing that I admired most through that whole journey, if I had to pick one thing, is the fact that you were working at a company you started. The board cut your salary, for God knows why. And even in that, as the company was struggling, you chose to pay your employees' health benefits out of your own pocket. That's not Richard for Richard. That's that's you being you and you being other focused, the way that you've always been. And that was the thing that really, it's said that if you want to see a person's character, you have to watch them go through something difficult. And
For
that's
sure.
that to
he did
me.
that. Sorry to interrupt. He did
Oh
that
no,
after our house fire and after we were burglarized. And to this day, if Richard's in the grocery line and somebody ahead of him, their card doesn't work, which we're all too familiar with that scenario,
yeah,
he will pay. He will just pick up their $100 bill, even if he only has $300 in his account. That happens on a regular basis. Richard's view towards money and generosity has not changed, and I mean, a lot of people's heads would explode with the our financial situation, and yet the level he would still get. He is literally the guy that will give you his last shirt off his back. But I also feel like that's part of the test while we're here. Like, who is our master? Is it money, or is it actually God who we talk about? And so I just feel like we've been tested again and again to see if we'll sell anybody out or anything, and we just don't. Like, that's like the thing that brings me the most peace and the most joy, is that for the most part we have kept our essence, and we've kept like the essence our children were born with.
yeah,
Thanks be to
absolutely.
God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we live in a
Yeah.
world of abundance. He really, how do you describe your view on money?
I've never seen money as the goal. I see money as an outcome, and sometimes a feedback loop that you're doing some of the right things, but that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you can be doing an amazing job, can be doing the right stuff, and you don't have financial rewards. And so I've just never focused on it. In fact, probably to a fault. Like, I even tell people, like, I have a pretty weird relationship with money because that's not my focus, right? And so I've been very fortunate where I've had an airplane and houses and all kinds of things, and I've been at the other end where we've not literally had a penny in the bank account. So you go through things in life that are ups and downs, but generosity shouldn't relate to how much money you have in the bank. So if
Yeah.
you're really generous when you have a ton of money and you're really stingy when you don't, you're not a generous person. You're just somebody who's willing to make themselves feel like they're generous or feel good when it doesn't harm you, when it doesn't, take away from you. A generous spirit is somebody that will give whenever the time demands of it, right? And so it's not relative to what you have. It's relative to who you are. Like that's the most important part.
Yeah, that's so true. Because I, having gone through scarcity mentality myself around money, I know that what turned it around was the decision and the recognition that in order to be generous, you have to be generous in the moments where you don't feel that you've got the ability to do it. Because, like you say,
Right.
if you wait till you win the lottery or your bank account's full, you're not being generous. It's just whatever. Yeah,
Right.
that's a really good point. So. Now, one of the other things that's always struck me about this is that you've always had the best way I could put it would be an unwavering belief in the people around you. It would seem, and where and yet when you went through the last couple of years, there were clearly some people who didn't deserve your trust. So I'm curious how, what advice would you give yourself, 5 years ago if you had to do it over again? Was there anything, like, I guess that's the biggest thing. I want to know, like, was there anything that you missed? And I know there's a lot of questions in that, but I'm just not sure which angle to go for.
Yeah, it's something I'm still learning, and I'm a long ways from having worked it out, and some of it I'm not sure I want to work out, right? So I have a very a huge amount of believing that other people have the same motivations, character, like ways of doing things that I do, and that's not to be overly complimentary to me. It's just that I believe in other people and way more than they probably deserve. And so I very often, in fact, I have one of my really good business friends say, I'm not allowed to go into a partnership or even a customer or an employee unless he interviews them because I'm terrible. Like I just, if they're excited about what we're doing, then they're on. They're in.
Yeah.
And what that's caused some really detrimental things in my life, in our life. And so, not understanding that you need to be a bit, like you need to scrutinize people a bit. You need to test where their motivations are. You need to test their honesty, what they do, what they're going to do in the hard times. Because I've had tremendous betrayal and I didn't see it coming. And so I think that's one of the lessons I'm continuing to learn. And I'm a 3-year-old child about it. Like I've gotten a little bit better, but I have not gotten great. So I'm trying, that's something I can't teach people. It's something that I'm on the journey trying to figure out how to get better without being cynical. Because I also, I don't want to come out of this saying, oh, well, my default is that people are going to screw you over or they're going to be bad or they're going to not deserve your love or belief or, like I don't want to be like that either because that feels like poison that I would take.
Yeah.
So I want to maintain my positivity, but also, be more discerning
Yeah.
about people's motives.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because my tendency is to trust people as well. And I am going through something not, I don't want to say similar because it's not, but it was a violation of trust that had financial implications, we'll put it that way. And I'm a bit more on the vindictive side on that one, I'll have to admit. You know, because there's a part of me, and in my case, I look at it and I say, okay, this is somebody who needs to be stopped. And partly it's because I see somebody who's continuing to do this to other people. And so, in that case, yeah, am I going to do something about it? For sure. Have I forgiven myself for getting into that situation in the first place? Absolutely. Because like you said, our first instinct is to trust, and that's when people aren't worthy of it. That's not a strike against us.
Right.
Yeah, Megan, how about you? I'm curious, because there were people I know in your situation where they were people you trusted and people your kids hung out with and whatnot. How was that for you, and what, if anything, would you do differently in hindsight?
I read a book like 10 years ago by Dr. Phil, Life Code, and it was basically foreshadowing everything that we went through, like what to look out for. Um, like manipulative, bad, evil, dishonest, whatever you want to call that kind of person, they're all the same. They're dressed differently, different careers, they look different, but they all have the same characteristics. And he wrote a brilliant book. I read it, and this still happened to us without me seeing it. Like, so I just think I was raised in a very beautiful but sheltered childhood. And so I had no skill set for wicked chess or people hanging out with me with an agenda. I just, that to me was, we were both blindsided, but I've always been, of the two of us, I'm way more discerning. I don't love everybody I meet, and I'm okay with that. And I'm very observant, and but I really have come a long way in opening my eyes to people sometimes just have an agenda from the get-go with you. And they I thought when you're down, that's when people give you a hand. And sad to say, in the world we live in, when you're down, people kind of give you an anonymous kick because they think they can and that you won't remember. There are those people, and we are surrounded with them. And there are also amazing angels among us. And so, but if you would ask me to make a list of who's who 10 years ago, I would say for the most part, I was dead wrong about,
Interesting.
yeah, about a lot of things, and a lot of, there's just a lot of, I mean, cowardly, weak.
Well, I think, if I can port back to 10 years ago, I would say that from the outside, you believed in the pretty picture. Like if
Oh,
somebody had
yeah.
the pretty picture
I'm,
life,
I'm a sucker for the pretty picture.
then
Yeah.
she would assume
Yeah.
that they were just as good on the inside.
Yeah.
And sometimes they could say all the right things, they could look great, they could have a great family, they could be in, all of the pictures of success and quality and happiness, but then inside be very devious, manipulative people. And so
And
thought,
even, yeah, and even if they're not devious, just weak. Like it's the saddest thing for me is just the people who didn't speak up when our name was mentioned in a room and they knew the real story. That's the biggest betrayal I have experienced. Like just such a profound disappointment in the strength in somebody's character that knows me for 20 years, held my babies. Like that to me is what broke my heart. And but it's kind of like that book by Mel Robbins, Let Them. Like everybody's on their own journey. And so that to me has just been a really hard thing to let go of, the difference between who somebody is and who I really, really believe them to be. And sometimes it just breaks your heart, especially when they're hurting your heart, but at the same time, there have been absolute people I never would have seen coming that just swooped in out of nowhere, like with these invisible capes. They're always so quiet about it. And it's just like I just really had a loss of innocence, but also my eyes opened to what true heroism is, to what true character is. And I really even though the angels in our life I always liked and thought highly of, I just never in a million years would have thought they would be who they are to our family and do what they did.
well,
What?
you said something earlier that I just wanted to touch on, because you said you don't really know who people are until you see them go through something difficult, right? Or a difficult situation that you're in together. And I lost my mother to a car accident, or in a car accident, when I was 17. And the most shocking thing to me was seeing people that I thought were my best friends like take off, and never be seen again. I saw people who I didn't think we were that great of friends, who were so unbelievably supportive and there and understanding, and really helped me stay standing when I wasn't sure I could. And it was just, really seeing that litmus test of, the forest fire and seeing what stood, right? And now going through, you would have thought I learned that lesson then and I would have kept it. But having gone through what we went through, like Megan said, we had friends that we'd known for 20 years. And, and all of a sudden we were in a position that we needed help and we were in a desperately tough, world, and they were nowhere to be seen. And some others that, we liked and we saw them a few times, and but I wouldn't have said they would go to the mat for us. They show up out of nowhere with unbelievable gratitude, giving and support. And it's like, wow, just for us to sit here today and go, I never would have thought those 10 people would have ran from us. I never would have thought those 10 people would have been talking crap about us behind our back. I never would have thought that those 3 people would have been here, with the cape on and with their, the generosity that they had. It's just wild. I mean, that's I think one of the gifts. It's like a forest fire. People see it as bad, but it's critical for the forest, right? It's healthier for the forest. And I think a life forest fire is a real gift because you get to see who's awesome and who's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because there's because what you went through is just so heart-wrenching in so many different ways. And I think back to, and again, I'm not equating this, but like when I went through lymphoma, I remember there were the people that
That's pretty rough.
yeah, yeah, but it's like, but there's no,
when I just did my cancer thing and overcame it.
But there was no betrayal involved. In a way, betrayal is a worse cancer, I think. And if I had to pick one, and what happened, in that moment was, there were people who went away and that I thought would have been there. I learned not to keep score, but in my situation, I didn't have people who were actively turning on me the way that you did, and that was the thing that really struck me about that. So there's that. But the other thing, and I had a name for them. I call them the silent supporters. These were the people who didn't say anything, probably because they didn't know what to say, but they were following everything. Because I did a lot of writing, and there were people who would come up to me, I mean, for months afterwards, and they'd be like, "Wow, how are you? I've read everything that you've written," and I had no idea they even knew. Yeah, and so they were, rooting and cheering, and I believe their prayers were as helpful as anybody else's. They just weren't as visible. But it's the ones that would have hurt the most, and you experienced it, I didn't, are those people who were actively sabotaging and turning their back and saying, the minute things got questionable that they didn't know an answer, they just assumed that you were guilty or whatever. That's, those are not friends. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that. But it struck me, that when as you were going through that, how many people, it was really, it was awful to watch. But I'm also grateful that, like, if you don't mind, there's the story that Megan shared with me recently that was really powerful. Was the rent story with your family member who recently passed. Are you guys comfortable sharing that one?
Yeah, they want to remain anonymous.
Okay.
So yeah, I can share it though.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So one day Richard came into the bedroom and I was waking up and he said, "We don't have rent money this month, and actually we haven't had it for a few months, and they're going to evict us on Friday." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he's like, "Do you know anybody that we can borrow this amount of money from? And we need it ASAP." And I'm thinking, I've never even asked my parents for money since I was 21 or 20. I don't know who. That's a large amount of money. I don't know who I can call. And I said to Richard, "Well, you know what? I'm just going to ask the angels and God, and I will pray all morning about this." And he was like, "Great.
That's
Great.
fantastic.
That's just great, And I'm like, no, if we need it, we can get this done. I think this was this before or after we made the fundraiser thing?
I think it was before.
Is before. So we didn't know that, like in Charlotte, well, maybe.
Yeah, we got judged very harshly for trying to raise money.
Yeah.
A bad message that you have to learn is evidently people are not allowed to ask for money.
Yeah.
We had literally so many friends stop being friends because they said, like, that wasn't cool. like trying to raise money for legal fees, I guess is a no. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that.
We didn't know. Like, I just thought when you need help, you ask for it. When somebody
Yeah.
asks us for help, I mean, somebody asked Richard for 100 grand once, and it never dawned on us.
I stroked a check.
Dawned
Yeah.
on us.
He didn't pay me back.
Yeah.
So I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
Dawned on us to be like, no, I'll give you 1,000 and never talk to me again. You know. But so we just, you know, we live in the number.
But finish your story though.
Okay, I'll go back to that. But we do live in the number 2 banking capital of the world, or the United States. And so we just, you know, we didn't know the money rules, but in any situation going forward, I have no regrets, no shame. If your kids need food on the table and you need rent, you ask the people you love. And if they care about you, they will not care that you asked. And they'll be, you know.
So you asked the universe.
So I asked the universe to help because I just didn't feel like bothering anybody for that amount of money. And so, except for the universe. And so, Richard was just like, oh, great. And then, so a few hours later, I went to get the mail, and in this envelope was a check for the exact amount, which was a very specific amount. And it was from a family that, you know, I always knew loved me, but I didn't know the link. Like, it was so touching. I ran into the living room and I said, well, I got it. The universe answered. And Richard's like, what? And I hand him this check and he goes, holy shit, how did they mail it today? Like this, like in a few hours. And I said, honey, they just did this. I don't know how, why, what. I haven't talked to them in a year or two. So it was the exact amount. Richard's like, holy shit. He runs to the bank.
It was into my account for I measured it 11 milliseconds.
Yeah. And so but I mean, that's been the whole, our whole journey has been stuff like that. Like people wouldn't believe how blessed and protected we are. Because it's just like, you can't make that up, but it sounds made up, but it literally came within hours. And then Richard told me, well, we actually weren't getting evicted Friday. We're getting evicted tomorrow, but I didn't know how to tell you that. And so that night we contacted the amazing family that did this for us. And we had some tears with them, telling them the story. And the wife just said, you know, I've been through a lot in my life. And when God's put something on my heart, I just listen. And God said, send Megan and Richard X to X amount of money. They really could use it this week to keep their children happy and in a nice home. And like, she had no, she just knew that she was just supposed to send it. No, you know, didn't even want it as a loan. Just, it was supposed to be a gift. And, just incredible. And, and forever kind of changed the way, like, I want to be when we are in the position to give that kind of money. Like, I really want to make a difference in people's lives and pay it forward, because that was when I knew God has not abandoned my family.
Thank you for sharing that. That's such an amazing story. And I love that because it sounds like one of those ones that you would read in those abundance books. You know,
and you think they're not true.
Right? And you think they're not true. But I had, you know, just quick example, I had a similar experience. I remember I had been invited to go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you know, with an old girlfriend at one point, and I was financially circling the drain. This is, you know, 20 years ago or whatever. And in the 400, all we had to pay for was the flight, because the house was paid for, you know, this beautiful mansion in Jackson Hole. Well, the flight was $400, which was exactly 800 more than I had at that point. And so I'm like, how am I ever going to do this? And literally that day, I got a check from my grandmother because my great uncle had died, and he left all of his great nieces and nephews $400 each
Oh my gosh.
And he was the last person on earth you would ever think would leave money because people were always sending him money. He was like a night watchman and worked at libraries and just kind of traveled around and just did his own thing and never really had any money. So the fact that he was leaving us something and that it was the amount that I needed was like, whoa, yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
it's eye opening. So I totally believe it. But the fact that it happened to you guys like that, I mean, it's just mind blowing in such a good way. And it's
Yeah.
cool because, it's been said that, where there's light and there's dark, you've had a lot of dark in your life, but at the same time, there's a lot of light in your life too. And what's cool to watch is that now I feel like the light is really coming forward, and sending the cockroaches running, fortunately.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like not really an expression, but the belief that, if darkness shows up, don't fight it with darkness,
Yeah.
right? Turn the fucking light on.
Yeah.
Turn the damn light on. Sorry, I got to edit that out. Um,
Yeah.
it's like you have to go way brighter, right? And if you go dark, you're playing into that bad game. And so, you know,
That's my lesson too. The darkness wants your light, but then when the darkness gets your light, if you give your light, you're now dark. And my number one thing is they want your essence. And so the more you can keep your essence and your light, it's just like, so if you get bitter or anything where you start acting like the dark, you're giving in. And so it's just it's a full-time job to protect yourself from that eating at you, because it really tries to tear you down, but
Yeah,
you can't believe in the
absolutely.
lies. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, if you're focusing on the darkness, yeah, you could accidentally, like you say, snuff your own light out. But if you think of yourself as a candle and you light somebody else's candle, you haven't dimmed your own light at all. You've just made everything
right.
else around you brighter. You know, I
Yeah,
don't
and
know.
that's Richard's specialty.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to be respectful of your time. Any closing thoughts or advice that you would have for people going through challenging things? Because you guys are uh, role models in many respects. I deeply admire what you've been, how you've handled yourselves.
I mean, I think it's amazing what people are capable of, all people, right? And I think that all of us can be surprised even with ourselves. When I look back, if you would have told me in the beginning, hey, this is going to be about 8 years of you getting, hammered, that would have been pretty daunting. But, you live in the moment, right? So try not to be afraid of the future. Try not to be upset about the past. Focus on today, and you can string an awful lot of todays together to where you've gone through something that you never thought was possible. But you can only do that by literally focusing on the next step, not what's in the future.
Yeah. And it's what
Yeah.
all the spiritual gurus say. It's all gratitude. But we have the most amazing family, the most amazing friends. Of course, some of the friends aren't who we thought they were, but we still have amazing friends.
Yeah.
And we always just, when Richard and I go to bed every night, we are talking about like how thankful we are for our 4 wonderful kids. And we always laugh. We laugh
I
a
was going to
lot.
say, keep a sense of humor throughout the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing.
And a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that Richard's going through and that I'm going through is not funny at all, but there
Yeah.
is so much funny stuff that it's so absurd that you just have to laugh at some of it, which even you and Rob, you and me have laughed plenty about.
Oh,
Yeah, and so,
totally.
sometimes people will judge you for that. I remember when our house burned down, I was standing in front of our garage where it started, and we had 2 cars in the garage. One was my Porsche race car that was uninsured, and Megan's Audi. And a friend pulled up, and they were just devastated. They're like, "Oh my gosh, how are you guys doing?" And I said, "Oh, we're doing great. Are you here for the garage sale?" And I said, "We have a Porsche for $1. It's a really great deal." And they were like really put off by it. I mean, they were actually upset by us having a good attitude. I'm like,
That's bizarre.
if I were crying and down, that doesn't make it better. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't bring things back. So I don't want to change that. I like
No,
you
don't
know
change that. It's beautiful. It's yeah. When you can maintain a sense of humor in a difficult time, that is a beautiful thing. First,
And we were truly just so grateful. That was a close call on all 6 of us. So a
yeah.
car in a kitchen table meant nothing to us in that moment. We
Yeah.
were so grateful to be
To
alive.
have our kids alive.
Yeah.
Two of them were on the couch right in front of where the door is to the garage. If
Yeah.
Megan wouldn't have woken up, they would all be dead. I'd probably be dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a sense of giddiness. Like, I can't believe we're still here. Like, that
Yeah.
was crazy.
Yeah.
And so, people all react differently to tragedies, but to us, that wasn't a tragedy. That was almost a tragedy. And so that's just kind of how we always looked at it.
Yeah, that's such a gift to have that perspective. And thank you for sharing that because I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but one of the affirmations that I say every day, I'm going to pass along to you in case you find it helpful. It's things are always working out for me. And it's just a
Nice.
nice, really easy thing to think about. So, and that's that you guys personify that, because when you're talking about living in the moment. So I would love to do this again if you guys are open to it, because I feel like we've
That'd be
just
great.
scratched the
Love to.
surface of the amazingness of who the Brassers are. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Well,
we love you.
Yeah, we always love our chats with you, no matter how long they take. So it's great to see you.
Next time we'll do 6 hours.
I
Awesome.
can't understand, how are you so old? But I'm not. You were in in 1977. What was the year? I don't think I was born yet, right?
No. Yeah, I aged faster but more gracefully. So, what can I say?
It was great to see you, Rob.
Great to see you.
Can't wait to see you soon.
Bye,
Yeah.
Rob. Love you.
Love you too. All right. Thank you for tuning in. If you've made it this far, it was another episode of the A Trek Within podcast. We're happy to be back on the air, and you can count on us to have more episodes coming up. There's a few that I'm very excited about. So stay tuned and keep trusting your intuition. And remember, things are always working out for us.